Welcome back to Lyrics to Go. I am Daniel Maté, and this is part 2 of my deep dive into Joni Mitchell's best work after the album Blue, which is the album that most people know her for. If you haven't watched the first part of this episode, I recommend going back and watching it and then coming on back. Of course, you could watch this one and then go back and watch that one. It's really up to you. And as always, please like, share, subscribe. Spread the word about Lyrics to Go. You'll be glad you did.
It's just as natural as the weather in this moody sky today.
As we talked about last time, the 3 albums that came out between Blue and this one, again, For the Roses, Court and Spark, and The Hissing of Summer Lawns, they all chronicle insecurity, relational unhappiness, women being stuck in situations that aren't really nourishing them, but they don't see a way out of. Whether that woman in question is Joni herself or some other real or fictional woman she's singing about. But Hejira is the album where she literally breaks free. The word Hijira has been translated a number of different ways. It's Arabic. I've heard it translated as a traveler. The most literal definition that I've read, I guess the Quranic definition, would be Muhammad's departure from Mecca to Medina in the year 622, marking the consolidation of the first Muslim community. Joni Mitchell herself has defined it this way: running away, no shame. And that's a fitting concept because the entire album is a road trip album, and it might be the greatest road trip album ever recorded. Not only is it about travel, and Joni wrote it while she was driving back and forth between New York and Los Angeles several times, but it's about traveling in the aftermath of a relationship. A couple of quick addenda. I read in an interview she gave to the filmmaker Cameron Crowe back then that one of the things that distinguished this breakup from the breakups she chronicled on her previous albums was that it didn't have the same sense of failure as the other ones, which is another sign of a growing sense of maturity. She talks about how she had the sense that no one was to blame. It just was what it was, and so she was running away with honor. The other thing to note is that the very first words on the album, the very first lyric in the song Coyote is, "No regrets." And my personal connection to this album is that when I got divorced a few years ago, the first thing I did was I got in my car and I drove from Vancouver to New York. It was the only thing I could think to do to sort of process what had just happened. And this album I kept playing over and over again. And, you know, having Joni Mitchell as your road trip companion in a situation like that.
Yeah, you could do a lot worse.
Now, I could spend an entire episode on each song on this album. I think they're all just brilliant. I'm going to focus on just one, the title track. But I do recommend to you go check out Rick Beato's episode about the song Amelia. It's a really beautiful breakdown of how the song is constructed, especially musically. So this song, being the title track, is kind of the mission statement for the album. And remember what I said, running away, no shame? Well,
I'm traveling in some vehicle. I'm sitting in some cafe. A defector from the petty wars. Shall shut love away.
So we immediately get in the first few lines, in very striking imagery, what it is she's running away from. And she continues, there's comfort in melancholy when there's no need to explain. It's just as natural as the weather in this moody sky today. So you get the sense of just the pleasant passage of time. You know, there's melancholy, but there's comfort in it. And somehow the sky and the landscape are like matching her melancholy mood, and it feels very natural. And as Joni does so often, she goes here from like a tight, zoomed-in angle on her own particular experience to a more zoomed-out angle, and this is memory and reminiscence about the relationship she's running away from or leaving behind. In our possessive coupling, so much could not be expressed. So now I am returning to myself these things that you and I suppressed. One of the things I love about that line is because there's a bit of a separation between returning to myself and then the rest of the sentence. It almost sounds like it would be complete after, so now I am returning to myself, which is sort of a self-helpy way of saying, you know, I'm getting to know myself again, I'm doing a self-care or whatever. But it's actually more specific than that. It's like I'm repatriating to myself these parts of myself that I had to sort of section off in order to make this dysfunctional relationship work. And I spoke in the last episode about how the album Blue is also very much a travel album. But that album is full of sort of giddy adventures and fun and thrills and, you know, the kind of excitement you can get when you're a rich rock star, you know, just kicking around Europe.
Sitting in a park in Paris, France. Wind is in from Africa. I met a redneck on a Grecian isle.
This is slower, it's more considered, and there's just so much more variation even within this song. And she makes some profound sort of philosophical statements. You know, it never has been easy. Whether you do or you do not resign, whether you travel the breadth of extremities or stick to some straighter line. It's a very poetic way of saying it's not easy for any of us. And once again, she is just a master at expressing contradictions within herself. I'm porous with travel fever, but you know, I'm so glad to be on my own. That feeling of, oh my God, I'm exhausted, it's surreal, my head is spinning. You know, what I really need is to stay in one place for a few days, but man, am I ever glad to be on my own. And still somehow, the slightest touch of a stranger can set up trembling in my bones. So just because she's out on the road, she has not shaken the sort of being hooked on relationship, on excitement, on courtship.
Might as well face it, you're addicted to love.
But she knows somehow that this is where she needs to be right now. But then, you know, right away she reminds herself, I know no one's going to show me everything. We all come and go unknown, each so deep and superficial between the forceps and the stone. The ability to remark in one or two lines on the profundity and the shallowness of the human experience, how on the one hand our lives are deep and significant and very real, and at the same time they're gone in the blink of an eye, and you know, how much difference do they make? The ability to sit with both of those sides of the paradox is to me the sign of a deep thinker, and when a deep thinker can also be a master songwriter.
Excellent! Excellent!
And she keeps butting her head against this contradiction. We're only particles of change, I know, orbiting around the sun. Like, I know, you know, ultimately it's not that significant. But how can I have that point of view when I'm always bound and tied to someone? And there's the rub, right? And then she sees this incredible image of white flags of winter chimneys waving truce against the moon. And of course, someone who's been driving for days, someone who considers herself a defector from the petty wars of love relationships. She sees these winter chimneys blowing smoke, and what she sees is white flags waving truce, you know, like the possibility of living a life where love isn't such a battlefield.
Love is a battlefield.
And she finishes the song the way she began it, but with one crucial little twist. I'm traveling in some vehicle, I'm sitting in some cafe, a defector from the petty wars, until love sucks me back that way. So she knows, even this road trip, this sense of freedom and expansiveness and contemplation, even this is temporary.
Shut me up and talk to me. I'm always talking.
Joni's next album was called Don Juan's Reckless Daughter, and this was a controversial album. Even people who had stuck with her until Hejira, which was well respected, for some people it was a little too jazzy. With Don Juan's Reckless Daughter, she really went into an experimental mode that many people just couldn't get down with. To top it off, the album cover was like super off-putting to a lot of people, and even offensive, where she's in drag as a man and in blackface. And the story goes that she actually showed up at a New York party once full of, you know, hobnobbing celebrities, dressed in this character as a black man, and no one knew it was her the entire time. Now, you would think that someone who pulls a stunt like that would be cutting off her ties with the black community and with sort of right-thinking people everywhere. But one of the interesting things about Joni is that she's always been fascinated by black music. She's always deeply identified with it.
I'm ready to make a don't care about no weather, don't care about no trouble, got myself together. I see the kind of pretension that's all around me. I come apart, baby.
And in return, black musicians have shown her all kinds of respect. You know, you see Herbie Hancock.
There are not too many Joni Mitchells that come along in the world, and I happen to be alive and happen to have met her and worked with her.
Prince was an enormous fan of hers.
You're in my blood like holy wine. You're so bitter, so sweet. I could drink a case of you, darling.
Wayne Shorter, the legendary saxophone player, has worked with her, and as we'll see in a moment, one of the greatest jazz musicians of all time wanted to record his last album with her. And then there's the most epic cosign of them all.
Joni Mitchell never lies.
I don't have a ton to say about this album. I really don't know it as well. One song I would really recommend to you, and I'll put it on the custom Spotify playlist for my Patreon subscribers, is called Talk to Me, which I recently found out was written about Bob Dylan. As far as I know, her and Dylan were never lovers, but they were together on Dylan's 1975 Rolling Thunder Review tour, which if you haven't seen the Scorsese documentary about it on Netflix, it's wild. I really recommend it.
A prisoner of white lines on the freeway.
And this song is about her trying to get him to talk to her and feeling kind of silly and garrulous and embarrassed around him because he's so cool, because he gets so much more attention and respect than she does, and especially around this time. I mean, I think respect for her has come around and people have realized how crucial she is, but, for so long, she was not even second fiddle to Dylan in many people's minds. And really that disrespect extended to Dylan himself. So telling Anecdote is in 1974, David Geffen, the record mogul, who Joni was shacked up with at the time, holds a party at his LA mansion, and all kinds of music stars are there. Joni had just dropped her masterpiece, Court and Spark. Dylan had just released his, I guess it was a comeback album of sorts, Planet Waves. And both albums get played during the party and everyone's gathered around fawning on Dylan during the playing of his album. And then when Court and Spark comes on, Dylan falls asleep on the couch. Now, Court and Spark, from beginning to end, is just a work of absolute genius, bravery, audacity. It's incredible. It's a classic. Planet Waves is one of Dylan's most forgettable albums. It has Forever Young on it, but overall, it's a pretty lackluster effort. So that tells you a little something about what Joni was up against, even at the absolute peak of her career. But yeah, this song apparently is about trying to get the great Dylan's attention. But it starts out with just sort of a really funny nightlife kind of image. There was a moon and a street lamp. I didn't know I drank such a lot till I pissed a tequila anaconda the full length of the parking lot. I mean, I've heard of pissing contests, but this takes the cake. The urinal cake, am I right? And then she gets embarrassed. She says, I talk too loose. Again, I talk too open and free. I pay a high price for my open talking like you do for your silent mystery. And she's like proposing possible topics of conversation. She says, we could talk about power, about Jesus and Hitler and Howard Hughes, or Charlie Chaplin's movies, or Bergman's Nordic blues. Please just talk to me. And the music has an excitable, nervous quality to it, with Jaco Pastorius' amazing bass playing kind of bubbling underneath, like the butterflies in her stomach. And it's like, in order to calm her own nerves, she just keeps talking. She talks about the slings and arrows of outrageous romance, and then she says, I stole that from Willie the Shake. Neither a borrower nor a lender be.
Neither a borrower nor a lender be. To thine own salvation.
Romeo, Romeo, talk to me. And I'm actually starting to think this is Joni trolling Bob Dylan. And I'll bet it worked. She asks him, is your silence that golden? Are you comfortable in it? Is it the key to your freedom, or is it the bars on your prison? Are you gagged by your ribbons? Are you really exclusive or just miserly? You spend every sentence as if it was marked currency. Come and spend some on me. Shut me up and talk to me. She is really not afraid of looking silly. Like, she just does not take herself that seriously. I really admire that. And then she does a very credible chicken impersonation.
I'm always talking. Chicken squawk. Please talk to me. When Charlie speaks to Lester, someone great has gone. The sweet
Well, if Don Juan's Restless Daughter put people off of Joni Mitchell, this next album left many people scratching their heads. Mingus, as in Charles Mingus, as in the great composer, band leader, bass player, Charles Mingus. And the story of this album is fascinating. Briefly, Mingus was dying of Lou Gehrig's disease, and he wanted to record an album with Joni Mitchell. That was like one of his last artistic wishes, and he called her up, and immediately she said yes, of course, and she flew to his deathbed side and asked him questions, and he told her stories, and they discussed, which songs she was going to do. She might write some originals, she might write lyrics to some of his songs, and as she tells it, we went through some of the old songs. Goodbye Pork Pie Hat was the one we decided on immediately. I had to find my own phrasing for the notes. I had a block for 3 months. Well, speaking as a lyricist myself, and especially one who works in musical theater, there's often the case that you write a song music first. And what I mean by that is that the music comes to you already written. Now, it's easier if you're the composer. Like, if I've written a piece of music and then I write lyrics to it, well, that's not so hard because I know the music inside out. And when I wrote it, I probably had some sort of lyrical content, or at least a concept or a mood in mind. But when my collaborator, for instance, the composer I've worked with for years, Will Aronson, hands me a piece of music for a particular moment in our show, then I have this really interesting puzzle to solve, which is, how do I find words that sound like they were meant to go with this music? How do I make it sound as if the words came first?
Whether a mild or a severe end, you'll kiss your rear end. Goodbye. Sudden, slow, or quick, you can take your pick. There are so very many ways to die.
And it's really a tricky challenge. So to do that with one of the most famous instrumental jazz standards of all time, I can't even imagine what a daunting task that must have looked like to her when she started. And she took a very interesting tack with it. I think this is really fascinating. So Goodbye Pork Pie Hat was originally written about Charlie Mingus's friend Lester Young, who was a great sax player who died a few months before the song was recorded. And he used to wear one of those pork pie hats that were in fashion in those days. And here's what Joni says. Charlie assailed me with historical information about Lester Young and his family background concerning his early playing days. He used to tap dance in his family band with his father and mother. He was married to a white woman, traveling through the South in a time when that was just taboo. A lot of the great black musicians were forced into cellars or the Chitlin circuit. Now remember that because it shows up in the lyric. And she says, so I had all these details, but I still couldn't, with any conscience, simply write a historical song. And, I'm not sure what conscience has to do with it, but I think Joni Mitchell being true to herself means she's not just going to write a story song about someone else. She always situates herself somewhere in the narrative. She knows the theory of relativity really well. The thing being observed changes depending on who's observing it. And so there's no pretending to be cool or objective. But she does start it out as a historical narrative, as told by the man who's telling it to her. When Charlie speaks of Lester, someone great has gone. The sweetest swinging music man had a Porky Pig hat on. Now, what's really cool about that, and it's a little bit subtle, but, the song's called Goodbye Pork Pie Hat. It's nothing about Porky Pig.
That's all, folks.
Well, but she has to change it up because of the scan. And scan basically means, imagine lyrics as the suit and music as the body. How well do they fit? Or are there awkward places where it's hanging out over here or too tight over here? And the number of notes and the number of syllables have to be a good match, right? So given the melody, if she sang, the sweetest swinging music man had a pork pie hat on, you can hear how awkward that is, right? So she changes it up so that it flows, so that it's smooth, so that it scans.
Had a Porky Pig hat on.
And then she gets right into the historical context. She doesn't shy away from talking about this dark age. He was a bright star in a dark age. We're talking about Jim Crow here. When the bandstands had 1,000 ways of refusing a black man admission, black musician, and then, here's an understatement, In those days, they put him in an underdog position. Sellers and chitlins. And the chitlin circuit was sort of this roster of venues that black musicians were relegated to playing. Sellers and other places that were tucked away from the view of respectable white audiences. In the second verse, she changes up the context a little bit and starts talking about Lester's interracial relationship. When Lester took him a wife, arm in arm went black and white, and some saw red. Very, very sly way of talking about race relations. And these people who saw red drove them from their hotel bed. But the super coolest thing about this particular verse is something I only realized recently when I went back and listened to Charles Mingus's original. You know how I said it's challenging to take a famous melody and put new words to it and make it sound good? Here, Joni Mitchell takes the saxophone solo, an improvised instrumental section, and puts words to those notes. It's really something.
When Lester took him a wife, arm in arm went black and white, and some saw red, and drove them from their hotel bed. Love is never easy, it's short of the hope we have.
And then the song ends with an anecdote in which she's a character. And it's not immediately obvious what this has to do with Lester Young or Charles Mingus, but it all comes together at the end. So the story concerns her and Don Elias, who was a black bandmate of hers, a percussion player, and they were good friends, I believe. Nope. Turns out they were lovers. They were shacked up together. To say Joni Mitchell can get it would be the understatement of the century. And she says, now we are black and white, embracing out in the lunatic New York night. And then she makes this very striking aside. She says, it's very unlikely we'll be driven out of town or be hung in a tree. That's unlikely! Exclamation mark. Well, it's an accurate statement. It's a little bit shocking. It's rather irreverent, and one might think it's a bit glib. But she is drawing all these strands together, right? Lester Young's history of having an interracial marriage and just how existentially dangerous that was for him. And now here she is in the late 70s, out on the town with her black musician friend, and they're having a great time, and she's just sort of reflecting on how times have changed. But that's not the only connection between her and Lester Young here. So her and Elias come out of the subway, and they see under an awning outside a nightclub, there's a crowd of black men. And when they come closer, they see that these men are watching two young boys, and she describes what they're doing. She says, the two boys are dancing this very robot-like mime dance. So here we have one of the first references to breakdancing, b-boying, in a song, and it's by Joni Mitchell. Anyway, the punchline to the anecdote goes like this. She realizes that the music the boys are dancing to is Lester Young, which is coming from the jukebox inside the bar, which is festooned with pictures of Lester Young all over the walls. And she looks up.
Down on me we look up and there's a sign up on the awning. It says, pork pie, hat bar.
And so in kind of a loopy way, and I guess I mean loopy in two sort of ways, right? It's a little nutty, but it's also kind of circular in this neat way. It comes full circle. She starts by listening to Charles Mingus talk about his friend, and then she's back in New York shortly afterwards, probably after Mingus died. And all of a sudden, she's watching this modern scene, which is accompanied by a soundtrack of Lester Young underneath the awning of the bar that is named after him. And it seems to me that not only is Joni Mitchell the only person on earth who could have written this song, I'm betting it wouldn't have happened to anyone else quite in this way. Now the Mingus album is slightly unfinished. Her and Mingus never quite clicked completely in terms of the collaboration, and he died in the middle of the making of it. It's still got some great stuff on it, but for my money, the best place to enjoy its greatest hits is on the concert album, and you can actually see the entire concert on YouTube, Shadows and Light. And there you'll see her playing this song and The Dry Cleaner from Des Moines and God Must Be a Boogeyman, which I love, and with the most incredible band behind her. Jaco Pastorius, of course, her frequent collaborator, Pat Metheny, Michael Brecker, all, jazz ringers. And she herself, her guitar playing and singing is just unbelievable on that concert. Plus there's one just indescribably cool moment which I featured at the end of my April Fool's episode. And I pity the fool who doesn't click on the link above me right now to go back and watch that one. Well, wait for this video to finish. It's almost over. All right, you Mitchell maniacs, that's all the time we have in this episode. But stay tuned. Part 3 is the final part, and it's going to be a doozy in the best way possible. We're going to start off by taking a quick look at Joni Mitchell's idiosyncratic and I think underrated 1980s output. Here's a sneak peek at that. Oh yeah, I love the Police. Could be Rick Springfield. He's great. Maybe Bryan Adams? Either way, it's rocking. And finally, we will look at sort of the latter phase of Joni Mitchell's career, where she turned a few corners. Stylistically, she went in some ways back to her roots, but kept moving forward. Lyrically, she kept growing and deepening and maturing and really embracing middle age and the wisdom that comes with time and experience. And also in terms of her standing and stature in the music world, this period it really saw people coming around to realizing just what a friend we have in Joni. So, I can't wait to get into all of that good stuff with you. The entire episode is going to be available to my Patreon subscribers only. And if you want to get out ahead of that, you can go to patreon.com/lyrics2go and sign up at the $5 a month level for bonus episodes. There's a bunch of other tiers you can choose from, all the way down to $1 a month. And at all levels, you get all kinds of neat bonus goodies. So check that on out, and I hope you'll consider supporting this channel. And thank you either way. And that is all I have to say for now. Until next time, I'm Daniel Maté saying, I've got lyrics to go, and now you do too.
I'm down to roll it dice. I'm stalking the slot that's hot. I keep hearing bells all around me, jingling the lucky jackpots. They keep you tantalized. They keep you reaching for your wallet here in Fool's Paradise. I talked to a cat from Des Moines. He said he ran a cleaning plant. That cat was clanking with coin. Well, he must have had a genie in a lamp, 'cause every time I dropped a dime I blew it. He kept ringing bells, nothing to it. He got 3 oranges, 3 lemons, 3 cherries, 3 plums. I'm losing my taste for fruit, watching the dry cleaner do it. Like Midas in a polyester suit. It's all luck, it's just luck. You get a little lucky and you make a little money.